welcome to KoshienCast, the podcast where we refuse to play dirty until the last 5 minutes. My name is Matt, and joining me today is a special guest, Matt.
Heyo!
Hi, so, welcome to the summer season, Matt.
Hey, thanks. I'm very excited to be here in summer, finally, away from the doldrums of Yowamushi Pedal and Tiger Mask.
Yeah. Tiger Mask at least went out on a high note, but we're into a few new shows with the first week of the summer season. We'll be covering every sports anime that aired between July 2nd and July 8th. We released the Tiger Mask W review a few days ago. We tried out a character draft, which I don't know if anyone else had fun with it, but we certainly did.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so we're going to be doing another one of those for Yowapeda later this week. Did you have anything else you wanted to announce, Matt?
No, I think I'm good, but I do have one thing for our new segment of the show, the question of the week. Believe it or not, we actually got an email asking.
Yeah, you don't need to frame it like it's so crazy. It's not that crazy, but it was exciting though to get that contact.
I'm not surprised that we got an email. I'm surprised we got one so quickly, and I'm very happy. Very happy about that. We are very thrilled. In fact, we have we got a question from a fellow Matt.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say about this is, if we were writing these questions to ourselves, we wouldn't say it was from a guy named Matt. So that's how you know this isn't fake. So
I didn't even think of that.
I'm a Matt E. The other Matt on this podcast is a Matt K. We got it from a Matt L.
Right.
And he actually sent a couple questions. We may come back and do some of the others later. But we're just going to do one question he asked now. So I'll read the beginning of his email and his first question. So he said, Dear Matt and Matt, so I've listened to a couple episodes and have come to the realization I'm way over my head when it comes to understanding 1/10 of what you're both talking about on the podcast. Well, it's good to know that we're really being a welcoming audience. That is my fault, and in no way should reflect on how well you're doing, parentheses, which is great, on making a podcast. It is just very far from something I know. Thus, my questions are not so much about series, but about your motivations. And so this is the first question. Why did you do this podcast, and what keeps you going? You talked about your disdain for Tiger Mask. Well, for 37 weeks we did, yeah. How sometimes these shows can be a slog to get through, so why keep going? You also seem to genuinely like some other shows as well. So besides the shows, why talk about them? Why make this podcast? So he asked it about, 3 different ways, 3 different times, but that's the sort of thing, like, one, why did we start doing the podcast, and why do we continue to do it? So do you want to go first real quick, Matt?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest motivation for me is actually making discoveries. Like, when we started watching sports anime, we were basically watching pretty much, all the big popular ones, like Yowamushi Pedal, Haikyuu, you were watching Kuroko's basketball, stuff like that. And what we noticed is that it was a much broader subject matter than what we realized.
Mm-hmm. And that's basically based on the fact that we decided to give a very generous definition to sports anime.
Right.
So once we started doing that and looking more about the format and the content, like anything that centers around a sport or anything that could be called a sport, we got to do some more interesting stuff than we'd been exposed to before.
Right. And I think for me, it's going out and making those discoveries. Like, for example, without this podcast, I don't know if I actually would have watched March Comes In Like a Lion. Like, I would have heard it was the big show of the season, but I'm not sure if I would have had the motivation to just sit down and watch it week to week.
I probably wouldn't have. I mean, almost certainly.
I would have never gone back and watched Prince of Stride.
No, never.
Which I don't know. As a side note, I don't know if people if our listeners have listened to that episode. That is probably, I don't know if it's a good episode, but it is probably some of the most fun I have ever had recording the show.
Yeah.
And just the journey and the experience of discovering that wonderful, terrible show. And it's moments like that that drive me to keep doing this. And just constantly making new discoveries and, discovering, all sorts of subgenres of the genre.
Yeah. No, I agree. For me, that's a big part of it. The other part is it's just fun to have something to create. Matt and I have been friends for the majority of our lives.
Right.
But this is something that sort of, it gives us something that's unique to us, a project we get to work on together, which we haven't really had since high school.
Yeah.
So it's something that's just fun for us together. It's something we get to talk about every week, not just on the show, but in preparing for the show. And, who else can have inside jokes about so many different weird series? So I would feel awful if I actually watched through days and had no one to talk to about it.
That is true.
Yeah. Oh. So, thanks for the question, Matt L. We appreciate it. And to anyone else out there, shoot us a question at KoshienCast@gmail.com, or you can hit us up on Twitter or Facebook, but the email is probably the easiest, KoshienCast@gmail.com, and we'll read it. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
And just, let us know who you are. That's sort of part of the appeal for us is...
Yeah, true enough. Just getting to know who would be interested in listening to a sports anime podcast.
Exactly. This is the most niche, strange podcast concept. Well, it's not the most niche, but it's up there. And so for anyone who's kept listening, we do, one, appreciate it, and two, we'd like to hear from you. So I think that's enough of that. We have a lot of shows to get into this week, a lot of new stuff, so I'm just going to dive right in, Matt.
Please.
All right, so... the first show we're going to cover for the new season is Welcome to the Ballroom. And so in the first episode, we were introduced to the main character, Fujita, who is in his last year of junior high, which is the equivalent of an American ninth grader. He isn't really sure what he wants to do for high school. He doesn't have a goal in terms of his career, and he's criticized for that by all parties. He ends up stumbling into a ballroom dance studio by accident. He gets roped into doing a lesson, and then he watches some actual professional ballroom dance, and he's so captivated that despite the fact that he doesn't know how he can afford it or how he can pull it off, he decides he wants to be a professional dancer. And then the episode wraps up with him sort of learning some of his first few steps and then training until the break of dawn just on the first few things he's learned because he wants to become a master.
Right. So, this was the most anticipated show of the summer, not just, within the sports genre, but within, anime fandom.
Yeah. In terms of new shows, certainly.
In terms of new shows.
I mean, My Hero Academia is probably still going to be the most popular show that's airing in the summer.
Right.
But yeah, summer for anime on the whole was pretty light in terms of anticipated shows. It's generally a light season, each year.
Right.
But yeah, so this is definitely had the most hype, and people sort of survive on the what's simulcasting, where's the conversation. This is the one to talk about.
Right. So with that in mind, do you think it lived up to the hype, Matt?
Well, it's hard to say because it was well animated. The characters were fun. They were the designs were attractive. The movement was attractive.
Right.
I'm not sure how many people it would hook with the first episode, though.
So yeah, I had a bit of the same reaction you did. I watched it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and then when I was over, all I could think was that was almost a boringly good first episode.
Yeah.
It did a lot of things very well. The anime, like you mentioned before, the animation is very striking. Mm-hmm. You kind of almost need to have that level of animation to draw something like so fluid as ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
So in that regard, it worked. I think I'm going to give the story some credit as well. I think this is actually where it hooked me the most, believe it or not. I like the setup. So every sports anime kind of has... Like, the sport is really more of an allegory for something that the main character wants. And in this, I got that sense very easily. In this, it's Fujita wants confidence in himself. He sees ballroom dancing, and he sees how immensely confident these dancers are. And this is sold almost entirely by Sengoku, who I think is really the star of the show, almost.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean,
Like,
he's a lot more captivating of a character than Fujita by far.
Right. But, I mean, I think that's also kind of the point, you know? I think one of the more striking moments in the series was when, he's getting bullied, and they're calling him, Moguta. Which, I'm not sure how that's an insult. I know that is an insult, but I don't know how. And he just they're talking about how poor he is, and, like, Fujita doesn't even stand up for himself. He's like, yeah, I'm poor.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And I think it was at that moment, that immediately shows or, like, illustrates what Fujita's main problem is. He has no confidence in himself. He lets people walk over him. And I think that's where the show is strongest. And I think what this first episode did was illustrate where the plot is going to go forward, in basically building up Fujita, building him up more and more to be able to take a more assertive role in his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that being said, it felt like almost a surprisingly by the numbers sports anime.
I mean,
I don't necessarily treat that as a criticism because I like that. I'm just saying that, like, there are other sports anime with, less conventional sports, like you saw with Yuri on Ice, where it takes a very different approach to how it's going to structure itself. This felt, like, literally in the first episode, we have the main character learning a single exercise and then getting so captivated by mastering the technique that he unknowingly does it for 8 hours straight.
Well, for me, I thought that was a little bit more just illustrating him, like... It was illustrating how... I don't know if it was so much like him getting captivated by it, as it was just him really wanting to get the move down, because he's so used to taking orders from people, because literally what Sengoku said before was...
do it until I tell you to stop.
Yeah, and, like, he never was told to stop. So it sort of illustrates what his quote-unquote hidden talent is, which is following orders to a T.
Yeah.
So I guess that's why it still works for me, but I do see what you're saying. As, like, a big mainstream hit, it's not really something that offers anyone anything more than what you can expect from the genre.
Right, yeah. There's not a ton of crossover appeal besides, the design itself. But,
right.
I mean, that being said, like, I'm criticizing it from a general perspective. From a personal perspective, I enjoyed it a lot.
Right. And I think we both kind of mentioned this before, but, like, Sengoku is easily, I think, the most... I think he is the biggest draw for the series. Would you be able to go into that a little bit?
Well, I think a lot of it is just how he carries himself, right? Because one thing we talked about off air was the feeling that he represents a kind of hyper-masculine energy in a traditionally feminine enterprise.
Right.
So you don't necessarily... I think there's... For the general public, there's a lot to get over with treating ballroom dancing as a legitimate, competitive, athletic sport.
Right.
And so you almost have to have someone who is traditionally masculine and traditionally confident, who can speak for the sport. And you're like, well, I guess if that guy is so sure that it's an athletic competition, it must be. So he sort of sells ballroom dancing as being a sport in a way that you couldn't with a less hypermasculine character.
Right, and that's really where I think the series works most. I kind of like the way he almost treats it like he almost treats the dance hall like it's an old school dojo. Like, one of the things that immediately struck me was the way he kind of did like a gut check to Fujita in order to like get him to straighten up, because that is something that is very traditional in like old martial arts studios, where they would literally just strike the person if they did something wrong in their training. Like, if they didn't have the correct posture, they'd hit them to get them into the correct posture so that they would understand, like, this is how, like, no, you get in this position. That and the way, I think the biggest thing for me as well, though, that helped, like, more than just being sort of like an icon, almost, like, the way that actually sold him to me as a character was how he actually kind of took personal offense to Fujita, like acting like he could do ballroom dancing.
Well, yeah,
just like that.
Like, not to do it as a hobby, but he wanted to do it competitively. That was what set him off.
Right, but I think for me, what I liked about that was he didn't actually announce that to Fujita.
Yeah.
He's almost like passive aggressive about it. He's like, okay, fine, you can do that. These are the steps I do. Practice that until I tell you to stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, he's just almost wanting to force him to quit.
Yeah, basically, he's gonna give up, whatever. Like, if he thinks he can do it, fine, but he's gonna give up like that. And he's kind of shocked to find out, oh, shoot, you were serious. So yeah, I kind of like that dynamic to their relationship, about how it starts off like genial, but it's already kind of becoming kind of contentious. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be what drives the show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Yeah, I agree. Something else that we saw for the first time, though, is Dive. Would you like to tell me about it?
I would. So, the beginning of this episode, we find out the main character, Tomo, is practicing diving at a local club for it. It's not like a school-sponsored club. It's like a private club. He was inspired by the club's star member, Yoichi, and he's gotten a couple of lessons from him. Anyway, throughout the episode, we find out that the club is having problems, but it's been able to stay open because of Yoichi's general talent, because he's able to keep winning competitions. We also find out that Tomo has a girlfriend, kind of untraditional for a sports anime, but the episode ends with the team having a new coach brought on, named Asaki, who vows to take the boys to the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
So this show has not been... It's gotten a very average response, and I think that's probably appropriate. I think it's at least an interesting series. I think it's kind of funny to say, honestly, but I think the most interesting thing about it is the fact that the main character actually has a girlfriend.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wasn't sure what the vibe they were trying to establish with Miyu was. She just sort of like follows him around, and she's a hanger-on.
Right.
And so my assumption clearly was that, oh, she's paying attention to him and he doesn't notice. It's like, but partway through the episode you realize, oh no, she asked him out and he said okay because he was uncomfortable with saying no and he didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Right.
And he also wanted the other guys to be impressed that he had a girlfriend, so he said okay. Which I liked, just because, one, you don't usually have that established in the first episode.
Right.
And two, I liked it because that seems about appropriate for the kind of level of relationship you'd have when you're 14 or 15.
Yeah, kind of. It's like, at the very least, it sets the tone that this is going to be a very natural, like, story. Like, this actually seems like it's going to have a story about real, actual relationships.
Yeah, and real actual teenagers.
Right, exactly. Because, they're confused. They don't know what they're doing. Like...
Yeah, I mean, he's so uncomfortable with, like, he has no idea how to be a boyfriend, so when she says stuff like, oh, can I watch you dive? And he's like, no, you can't watch. And she's like, what? Why? And he says, no reason.
Yeah,
pretty
much.
He just always he gets defensive and uncomfortable, and then when someone wants to explain, he's just like, I don't care. I don't even know. Whatever.
Shut up, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. So even though on some level that's annoying to watch because it reminds me a little too much of my own past, it is definitely true to life.
Yeah, definitely. And that is, I think, though, the only really interesting part of the show. I think they did a fine job capturing the attitude of the boys talking with one another, with Sachin, like, kind of overreacting. He's like, dude, did you see the coach? The coach was with a smoking hot girl. Like, he's totally having an affair, and it's like, okay, like,
wait, no, what was she wearing? She was in a business attire. Like, she was probably from the company that owns the club. Why would you assume it's an affair? He's like, yeah, but like, what if it is, man? Yeah, like,
yeah, it's like,
again, very true to junior high boys.
Right. I think the major problem with the show, though, is that there's not. We're not really rooting for the team yet to really, like, make it to the Olympics. Like, it did a great job selling, like, a very natural, like, world, but it didn't really, like, inspire much, like... I don't really care about the main characters, I don't really care that this club is getting shut down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Mizuki Diving Club is not that interesting to me. It's not even, like, it's not associated with their school. It's just, like, the place that he happened to show up one day,
Right.
I don't know. I assume it'll sell it a little more in the future, but again, I think what it has going for it now is just a little bit. It undermines some of the assumptions about how relationships work in these shows, and it has some pretty good animation with its diving sequences. Those are legitimately fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Something else that's legitimately fun is quiz bowls.
All right, cool. You want to talk?
I'm going to talk about the fastest finger first. Sorry.
Fantastic.
My finger was so fast that I cut you off while you were helping me introduce it. So this is the first episode of the aptly named Fastest Finger First, or 703X Fastest Finger First. I think in the U.S. they're just taking out the 703X for promotional purposes and calling it Fastest Finger First, which is still a weird name, but at least it's memorable. Anyway, so it follows the travails of new high school student Kashiyama, who is trying to figure out what he wants to do in high school, but he's never been in clubs, he's never done sports, he doesn't think he has any special abilities. He's handed a pamphlet for the Quiz Bowl Club, but he just puts it away, doesn't think about it, then he fills it out while he's in class. He ends up going to one of the opening ceremonies for the new school year, and all the different clubs get to advertise themselves, and the Quiz Bowl Club comes up, and they decide to have an impromptu quiz, and they ask members of the audience to volunteer. Kashiyama refuses to volunteer because he's too shy and uncomfortable, but he ends up randomly getting called on and forced to go up and do it anyway. He starts to learn how quiz bowls work, and he is able to reveal that he actually has a knack for trivia, and he starts becoming intrigued by the possibility of competing with the special knowledge he has.
Right. So, I think you maybe liked this one just a little bit more than I did. Mm-hmm. I didn't dislike it. I thought it was fine. I am interested to see how it keeps going forward. I think my reaction to it was kind of the same that you had for Welcome to Ballroom, in that it almost felt a little too by the numbers. Mm-hmm. Just that it's like, I'm kind of just struggling to see who the series is for. I think
that's a legitimate argument.
like, that's not necessarily bad, mind you. Like, you know, nothing wrong with just having a fun sports anime.
Yeah.
But, like, and, you know, it is a unique take on the subject, which is, I think, the most interesting aspect of the show.
Uh-huh.
I did appreciate how the show did establish with Sasajima that I'm glad he did announce that this was a sport so that we can, in fact, cover this on the show.
Exactly. Yeah, we always have that backup. I think one issue with it. Well, I'm just kind of thinking about this now. Let me know whether it resonates with you. It feels a little bit like this show should have been made 10 years ago. Like,
yeah,
something about it feels kind of outdated.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I think, is the main character's character design. Sort of like he's the helpless milquetoast guy with the giant glasses who doesn't have any social skills, doesn't have any connection, anything like that was a trope that was a lot heavier in the 2000s.
Right.
There's also the unfortunate scene where he's sitting by himself and then a girl trips over him and he sees her panties, and then every time he looks at her the rest of the episode he thinks about her underwear. And, you know, she has this, like, oh, well, like, I'll forgive you for seeing my panties if you join the quiz club. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh. Oh, yeah, no. How many times have we seen this, you know?
You know, I think it's interesting that you bring it up like that, because I think what you said does strike a chord with me. I think for me, though, the way it feels sort of outdated is just in how it doesn't actually go that far with any of that. Like, it still feels like it's in that sort of...
Oh, yeah.
That early period when they were starting to push a little bit more towards that content. But it's not really quite there yet.
Yeah, it's like a Love Hina style accidental perviness.
Right. Rather than just going full on, like...
Yeah.
Like, making it the focus. It feels like it's kind of off to the side, but they're still trying to kind of decide on who the main focus group is for this, which I think is actually kind of a strength and a weakness of the show, to be honest, because at the same time, it also doesn't, like, you know, for Welcome to Ballroom and Dive, those were shows that were so very clearly, it's like, this is for girls. Like,
yeah.
You know, we got very well-toned, masculine men, and whereas this feels a lot like, I don't feel like it's a terribly sexualized show, which I kind of appreciate.
Yeah.
And I think that was like, in that regard, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Baby Steps almost. Just in how...
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Like, now, definitely not as good as Baby Steps.
Well, it's had one episode, so...
Right, true enough. But yeah, it kind of had that tone to me where it's kind of about... Like, it's kind of the same premise, too, where you kind of have this guy this sort of weird... Like, not really weird, but just this guy who's kind of off to the side, kind of getting drawn into the sport due to the attraction of a girl.
Yeah.
And you have, like... And you also kind of have, like, the president of the Quiz Bowl, who's just... He's a bit of a character, but he's not really quite, like... There's something about him that still feels a little restrained to me. Almost as being, like... Well, I'm not sure if what I'm saying makes any sense.
It doesn't, but
okay.
That's okay. Sasajima. I'm not. I have to say, for his character, he was the biggest upside for me.
Right.
Just because I've seen characters like Kashiyama and Fukami, the main female character. I've seen them plenty before. And they're fine. What I like about Sasajima is that I get a lot less tired of the extreme personalities.
That's fair.
And he is someone who completely and absurdly believes in Quiz Bowl, has no real hesitation about it, thinks that it is the ultimately virtuous endeavor. And so just his delivery is fun to watch. So for me, he's a real upside just based on the extremity of his character.
You know, I think that's fair, because I think in, like, for example, Cheer Boys, Wataru in that show, the Glasses Boy.
I think that's the 4 episodes where Cheer Boys was watchable, Wataru was definitely the high point for much of the same reason.
Right.
Gosh, so I forgot we even watched that show. Oh my God.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to remind you.
Oh no, it's fine. It's just crazy. Oh, Cheer Boys. Oh, man, that was a thing. All right. Well, so something else that was almost certainly a thing was Clean Freak Aoyama-kun.
Yep. That one's on me. So the general premise is Aoyama is a clean freak who is also a soccer prodigy. He refuses to play in a way that'll make him dirty, and everybody is just immensely enamored with his cleanliness, except for one guy named Kaoru Zaizen, who may be the captain. We don't really know, but he's another rich kid. Or he's a rich boy who goes to public school, but he tries his hardest at soccer. Another team from Oshigami Minami, another a school for like a lot of like upper class citizens, basically, comes to the school for like a practice game with the intention of recruiting Aoyama. Aoyama doesn't want to leave. They have a game. Aoyama at the very end manages to overcome his fears of being dirty, just for the sake of winning the game.
Right.
And that's kind of where the show ends. So you messaged me after watching it and told me, I think this is the show where we maybe disagreed the most, actually. You told me it was better than you expected. This was actually worse than I expected, believe it or not.
Maybe I just had lower expectations.
That may be the case, too. Maybe we're both kind of at the same point, but we just both... Yeah. Maybe we both agree, but we just had different expectations going into this. Yeah. The biggest issue for me with the show was the constant barrage of chibi art.
Yeah, there's a lot of chibi art. Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind it so much, but they fall on it so much for the gags. Yeah. In the show, like, literally, they spoil their own gags with the chibi art. There's this moment where Kaoru leaps up to, like, get a header, and Aoyama stops. And, like, all of a sudden, he transforms into chibi form. And Kaoru turns around and is like, what's going on? He's like, okay, so he's going to run into somebody or something like that. Uh-huh. And that's exactly what happens. They kind of spoil the gag with him transforming into chibi mode, almost. Like, it's so weird. Like, that they would...
Yeah, it's weird. It's just very clear from watching it that they're using as few cells as they can to animate this thing.
Right.
So the limited budget they do have, they use for the couple brilliant moments where Aoyama is actually playing at his full capacity.
Right.
But for the rest of it, they have to be really economical. So I think relying on it is as much a matter of making the show affordable to create as it is like being an effective means of telling a joke.
Which makes sense, I guess, but at the same... To me, it almost feels like a laugh track in like a terrible 90s sitcom, because it's like... It feels like it's almost trying to tell me, like, hey, this is where you're supposed to laugh, buddy. Like, isn't this funny? Like, he's deformed. And it's... And, you know, doing it once or twice is fine, but for almost every single joke is what gets me. There is one gag that works for me, and it's the fact that the captain of Oshigami, Takechi, for some reason he feels the need to constantly lift his shirt up and flex his abs.
Yeah, I think the thing that I thought was funny about that is just how he, like, bends over backwards, showing off his... Like, it is kind of a funny gag. I don't know if it'll be funny for 3 months straight. Right.
I don't know if he's going to be a major character or not, but we will see. It didn't... The one real upside to the show, barring Takechi's abs, I wish I didn't say it like that, was at the very least, we got it early on that Aoyama is fine with getting dirty so long as it's for the game, like for winning the game. That at least shows a bit more complexity to his character than just being like one extended OCD joke.
Yeah, I'm torn on that because it feels like such an anime thing for him to have this rule where he refuses to get dirty except for the last 5 minutes of the game, and then like he has no problem with it, or like, you know, like it feels like an anime thing where you have this internal clock that'll just count down and release your superpower, you know?
See, I didn't really get that from him. What I got more from that was that he was kind of using it almost as an excuse. It's like, well, so long as it's the last 5 minutes, I can do it. Because I kind of got that he was sort of inspired by Kaoru, by the fact that, like, despite the fact that it was a pretty much certain loss for them, he was still trying. And, you know, he basically sacrificed his face to block a kick and still ran forward and almost scored a goal. Because that was what Aoyama did. He just sort of ended up assisting Kaoru in a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess why it worked for me was that it did show that he could be inspired. Like, this wasn't just some unbreakable rule that he had that he could not get dirty. Because he was inspired by Kaoru.
Yeah, I think it'll depend on what happens in the next couple episodes, because if they keep repeating this, like, we've got 6 minutes left, just hold him off for 1 more minute, and then Aoyama can break free. You know, if they turn it into, like, a Super Saiyan thing, it's gonna be real boring real fast.
Right. And I guess that's the other problem I have with the series, is that I don't really have a clear idea of the direction it's gonna be taking.
Yeah, I know. I mean, our assumption going in was that it was gonna be a gag show that included soccer. I haven't really seen that disproven in the first episode.
Yep. And I don't know how much mileage they're gonna get out of that gag. They didn't really get much out of this episode, to be honest.
I know. Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, because we were comparing it to haven't you heard wait.
Yeah, haven't you heard I'm Sakamoto?
Yeah, I just had a brain fart if it was Sakamoto, but yeah, haven't you heard I'm Sakamoto? And like that show succeeded largely because the gag worked in the first episode and it was hilarious. But we will see where this goes. One other thing that we're seeing where it's going. Damn, that was a good transition.
I have a question, Matt. Do you just wake up in the morning and just decide you're going to nail it every single time?
I think about transitions in my sleep, yes. So got big wind-up, episode 14. So this is the beginning of the first game of the summer tournament. So Nishiura is finally starting their game against Tosei. There's some concern that it might rain. Tosei is watching Nishiura warm up, and all the upperclassmen are commenting on how bad Nishiura is, how they shouldn't even have to play because it's not even going to be a match. Ultimately, Mahashi is getting nervous too about the crowd because he doesn't want to disappoint anyone. Good old Mahashi. Nishiura bats first. They're able to get a hit on the first at bat, and then 2 sacrifice bunts get that guy around to third. Tajima is up to bat, but he can't quite catch up to the opponent's sinker, and so he strikes out, meaning that they are unable to score in the first inning, and Mahashi is preparing to start the bottom of the first.
Right. So this was it was kind of a slow episode, but it didn't seem like there was going to be a lot to discuss in this episode, but there is kind of like a lot of things off to the side that are interesting. So we did a simul watch of this one, and Matt, you had a good observation about Tosei. Sorry.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me was the comparison of the crowds.
Right.
So they made sure to mention at several points for Nishiura that Himada, the cheer captain, had managed to get a lot of people from the school, other students, along with the kids' parents, to show up to help support the cheering section. So they've got actually a fairly robust presence at the game.
Right.
Whereas for Tosei, there's just a few scattered fans. Most of their support comes from the fact that they have a very large team. So there's a lot of team members who aren't actually on the active roster who are there to be their cheering section along with the school band. So they have students there who basically have to be there, while as Nishiura, most of the students that are there for them are ones that were interested or got pulled into it. So it's just sort of an interesting comparison. So you have to imagine Tosei would get a big draw of fans, because they're a famous school. They are really competitive. They were the champions last year. But you imagine that most of them just stayed home for the first round because they were playing this terrible school in Nishiura, so why come out and waste your time?
Right, exactly. It's like, this is not something that's ever stated, but, you can kind of just see it in the background work. Like, they'll cut to the actual band, and, you kind of get this sense of immensity just by the fact that, they actually have a band that comes to play for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, if you actually look into the crowds, there are very few people, and at first I thought maybe they were just trying to save money on the animation, just trying not to, these are stills, they don't want to waste too much. But if you look over, but when they pan over and you see the Nishiura side, it's very clear that they are that this is a full crowd on their end.
Mm-hmm.
And so and it's one of those great you can just derive so much about the history of their team just from that. Just the fact that they are not this is not an important game for this team.
Yeah.
There was one more detail that was interesting to me about that was the fact they were talking about Tajima's position in the lineup. And they were okay, because it's okay, this guy probably has a pretty good at-bat percentage, and kind of discussing stuff like that.
You mean
kind
his
of just
on base percentage?
Oh yeah, on base percentage. Sorry, my bad.
Everyone has 100% at bat percentage.
Right? Yeah. No, you're right. Sorry, I mixed up my terminology. My bad.
You're good.
What I liked about that was it showed that they didn't do any research on Nishiura.
Well, yeah. I mean, it would be hard for them to because they're a new team, but they didn't even try. They don't know anyone's names. They're figuring it all out for the first time. They're just going off gut instinct when the guy walks up to the plate.
Right, which is interesting to me as well because there's this talk towards the beginning of the episode where two of the players are they're kind of talking about it's okay, we got to take this seriously. This is the first game, and it's it almost feels like their heart isn't really in it. They understand consciously yeah, we probably need to take this seriously, but I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's just that nice touch of realism that I always appreciate out of a big wind-up.
Yeah, the only reason that they're actually going out there to try and they're actually putting their best players on the field is because they don't want to let the underclassmen know that they're not taking it seriously. Right, exactly.
It's almost like a morale boosting. They're trying to kind of keep the team almost together by this sort of unified lie.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it was good. It was fun to see the strategy. I think we'll see a lot of this with Nishiura, where they're not as confident and comfortable of a slugging team. They don't have very many power hitters outside of Tajima and Hanai. So that meant that the first three batters all tried to bunt, or they signaled bunt when they came up, and two of them successfully bunted. Because they're not as strong, they're just trying to move people along however they possibly can get the ball in play and avoid striking out. So that kind of reflects the team too. Hey, they don't have as much experience. They're not as strong. They can't catch up to complex pitches as well. But they can lay down a bunt. And so that's what they're going to do. They're going to get it any way they can.
Right. What I liked about that, too, was that this is also the first time I think we've seen Tajima fail.
Yes. Yeah. He struck out. And I'll let you go first of what you liked about that. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just saying it's interesting because it already kind of sets the stakes a little high, even though it's a pretty early point in the game. Because now we have to go into the mindset of they can't 100% rely on Tajima, who's already kind of one of their major. He's already kind of a main force of their team.
Yeah, he's the main force, I'd say.
Yeah, he's kind of the heart of the team. He and Mihashi are kind of the reason why they can even possibly compete in the first place.
Right.
It also kind of sets another standard, kind of sets some doubt in mind for Mihashi as well, because Mihashi, since we've seen Tajima fail, now we see Mihashi up, and we don't know, these guys are that good that they can take down Tajima. How's Mihashi going to fare against them?
The one thing I liked about Tajima striking out was the fact that his expression was not anger or frustration; it was curiosity.
Right.
So he's always a fun character because he sort of just clearly enjoys baseball for its own sake. He gets a lot of joy out of playing, and he just wants to play against the best people to challenge himself. So even if other people get down, it's clear that he's not going to get down. He's going to be excited about facing a kind of pitcher he's never faced before. So I think even if that does bring some other people down, it'll be Tajima displaying his ability to get people back up.
Okay. Yeah.
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 So speaking of things that you can get up, we're going... Oh, that was a bad transition. It was good in my mind.
So you want me to talk about encouragement of climb?
Yeah, because you can climb up mountains. That's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, I got it. I got where you were going with it, buddy.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so the first episode is about Aoi. She can't get her homework done, essentially. She needs to get her homework done before she goes to Mount Tanagawa, because she promised her mother she would. And she kind of goes through some hijinks trying to get Hinata to help her out, who's actually on vacation. She goes to Kaede, who's just as dumb as she is. And eventually Kaede brings in her friend Yuka, who was set up a few episodes ago. And she comes and tutors them all.
Yeah.
And Aoi manages to finish her homework in time, and it's great. She got it done. And then the second episode is entirely about Kokona. Her birthday is actually on the day of the trip to Mount Tanagawa. She manages to find her present from her mother, and she decides to open it up, and discovers that there are new shoes. And then we spend several minutes watching her walk around town and just having a lovely stroll. End of the episode, she comes back home, and her mother comes back home late, and they have a surprise, and they have a little party. I mean, that's the episode.
Yeah, that's it. Neither episode could be referred to as, like, high-octane sports action or really providing anything to the show whatsoever.
I will give I'm not going to defend the second episode at all, like, that we watched. I don't know what the point of that was. The first episode, though, I will give it one thing. It did sort of subvert our expectations, because I always would have assumed Aoi was the smart one of the duo between her and Hinata. But Hinata's actually a weirdly responsible student who actually got done with all of her homework, like, well ahead of schedule. Which, it's not, like, a big thing, but I got a laugh out of it at the very least. Just sort of like I never would have expected that to be the case.
Well, what was funny about it, too, is that Aoi was just as surprised.
Yeah, kind of, like, I didn't think you were that good of a student. Wait, she did say she had a tutoring job. I get the only other thing I derived from that episode, at the very least, it shows how her friend group is growing, because now we have, now Yuka's starting to get involved with her life. Mm-hmm. Now she's like, she's got another upperclassman friend. At the beginning of the episode, we kind of see how she's sort of coming into her own, because, she's the one who actually goes and makes the reservations for Mount Tanagawa. Generally it's Kaede or Hinata who's doing all the planning. Now she's taking an active role of that. She's succeeding at work. Mm-hmm. So, there is some character growth there, at the very least.
And in the next episode, Kokona gets a pair of boots. So they both learned a valuable lesson.
Okay, there is one thing about that episode about that second episode. Nothing to do with Kokona, which is hard because she's literally there for, I would say, about 11 of the 12 minutes of that episode runs.
Yeah.
It is interesting for me to see that the bakery has not disappeared after the episode it was introduced in.
Yeah. You're right, because usually in these shows, they get a job for one episode, and then it's completely irrelevant, and that just explains, she has money because of the part-time job she works, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, no, the job is actually a part of her life now. Like, it's... she was going to her job in that previous episode as well. We see her, like, doing very well at work and her coworker praising her. And now in this episode, she's at work trying to get a cake recipe so she can bake a cake for Kokona. Mm-hmm. So, it's like, okay, so there's a bit more of a unified world here. Everything after that is just a mystery to what the point of this was. I guess it's just sort of a day in the life of a weird girl like Kokona.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I was kind of a little... It was kind of a little weird that she got a new pair of boots, and she's like, oh, okay, I should break them in. I want to go for a walk. Where do I want to go? I guess I'm going to go to the Akebono Children's Forest Park. So she goes to this, like, fantasy, like, kids park, and she, like, sits in a treehouse and reads children's picture books, and then walks home, and that's what she does.
That's just what she does, I guess.
The only substantive thing I could get out of that was actually, again, had nothing to do with her. At the very end of the episode, Aoi is going to bed, and she wonders, what are we going to do once our childhood promise of going to Mount Tanagawa is fulfilled? Which is maybe a slightly interesting question. It's like, oh, we always talk about climbing this mountain, so what are we going to do when we've climbed the mountain? It's not that interesting in itself, because it's like, okay, you all go to high school together, you're probably still going to hang out. It is interesting as a general sort of life question, like, when we have this one thing in common. For example, like, for me, with my friends from college, I could have this question like, oh, am I still going to be friends with these people when I leave college? Like, when we don't have this one thing that ties us together, is it still possible for us to be friends, or are we going to lose something? That's interesting. In this specific situation, it's like, you're not going anywhere. Like, of course you can keep hanging out after you've climbed Mount Tanagawa, but in principle, it could be an interesting question.
Right. But, again, it's one of those things that, we didn't need to spend 11 minutes following Kokona having a lovely stroll around town to get to that question.
Yeah.
This really felt like an episode that, they knew where it was going to end, but they needed to throw something in there to sort of fill out time.
I think they just needed some coconut time. They clearly have, like, about 4 episodes worth of plot for the Mount Tanagawa thing, and they just needed to get there and end the season there. So they're like, oh, let's stroll around with Kokona. Maybe she's popular.
I guess Kaede had an episode to herself.
Yeah.
And I guess they just didn't really have much more for Kokona's character.
Like, gosh, could they have given her anything? Could they have given her anything other than, like, I'm small and I like picture books? Like, anyway, I shouldn't be shocked or offended. The last thing I want to say about Encouragement to Climb is that, we missed an announcement like a month ago that Encouragement of Climb is going to have more anime coming out.
Right.
So the whole reason we started doing this, well, one, it was because spring was dead and we needed something to do. But 2 is because we thought they were going to be releasing a 3rd season this year. Turns out they're going to release an OVA this year in October. It's not clear whether or not we'll actually be able to view that in the US. But then next year, so in 2018, they're going to release Season 3 of Encouragement to Climb. So sometime we'll follow up on this, but we will have a substantial break between Season 2 and Season 3.
Correct, yes.
All right, and so that being said, Matt, I appreciate your time. We're gonna
always love to show up.
We're going to have a reasonable break between this episode and the Yaopeda review, which we're going to review in a few minutes, and we'll get that up later this week. So all that being said, have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.
Later.
Our logo design is by James Ratcliffe. The theme music is Fly High by Burnout Syndromes, covered and performed by Luke Bartka. You can follow KoshienCast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and our email is koshiencast@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back next week with the best and worst from the world of sports anime, and until then, keep training.